Smell of rosemary and butter filled my kitchen that Tuesday evening. I was browning a chicken in my grandmother's cast-iron skillet, the one she'd given me on my wedding day, and the windows were fogged from the rain coming down outside our little blue house in Asheville. I remember being happy. That's the part I keep coming back to. I was actually happy, humming along to some old country song on the radio, when my husband walked in and changed everything. His name was Bram. We'd been married for 4 years. He was a high school history teacher, and I was a graphic designer who worked from home, and we'd built a quiet little life together with 2 rescue cats and a vegetable garden out back. I thought I knew him. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen with his hands shoved into his pockets, the way he always did when he was about to ask for something. Except this time, he wasn't asking. "My niece had her baby," he said. "She's coming to stay with us for 6 months. You'll need to take care of the baby while she rests." I already told her yes. I turned off the burner. I remember that. I remember turning off the burner because I didn't want the chicken to burn. Because some part of my brain was still trying to be a good wife, even as the words were rearranging themselves in my head. 6 months, I said. She needs help. Her mother's not in any condition to take her in. You work from home anyway. It's perfect. His niece was named Renly. She was 26 years old, the daughter of his older sister Mary Saul, and I had met her exactly 3 times in my life. She had been distant at our wedding. She had skipped my 30th birthday. The one Christmas she had come to our house, she had spent the entire evening on her phone in the guest bedroom, refusing to eat the dinner I'd cooked because she said the smell made her sick. She'd been pregnant then, though no one had told me yet. She wasn't married. The baby's father, according to Bram, was not in the picture. "Bram," I said, "we haven't even talked about this. You can't just, it's already done, Iona. She arrives Friday." That was Tuesday. He'd given me 3 days. "I want you to understand something about me. I am not a woman who picks fights. I grew up with a mother who screamed at the dishes and a father who left when I was 9, and I learned early that peace was something you bought with silence. So I didn't yell at him. I didn't throw the wooden spoon I was holding. I just stood there with the rain hitting the kitchen window and felt something cold settle into my chest, something that hadn't been there 10 minutes before. "Why didn't you ask me?" I said. "Because I knew you'd say yes," he said, and then he kissed me on the forehead, like he was rewarding a child, and walked out of the kitchen to watch the news. Friday came. Renly arrived in a black SUV with 3 suitcases and a baby carrier, and she walked into my house like she'd been waiting for it her whole life. The baby was a boy. They called him Sutton. He was 9 weeks old and he had Bram's eyes, which I noticed right away, but didn't say anything about because I assumed it was just one of those family resemblances. The first week was a kind of hell I hadn't prepared for. Renly slept until 11 every morning. She ate the food I cooked, but didn't thank me. She left dirty bottles in the sink and wet towels on the bathroom floor, and she handed Sutton to me whenever he cried, which was constantly. He was a colicky baby. He screamed for hours. By the end of the first week, I had bags under my eyes. You could store luggage in, and Bram had started sleeping in the guest room because, he said, the baby's crying kept him up. I missed 2 design deadlines that first week. I had to email a client and lie about a family emergency. I felt my own life slipping out of my hands like water. But here's where the story really starts. Because what happened next wasn't the part where I got tired of being a maid. It was the part where I started to see. It was the second Saturday. Bram and Renly were in the kitchen, and I was supposed to be upstairs with the baby. Sutton had finally fallen asleep on my chest, and I was easing myself off the couch when I heard them laughing. Not a normal laugh. A private laugh. The kind of laugh you share with someone who knows you down to the bone. I stood at the top of the stairs holding that baby, and I listened. I couldn't hear the words, just the rhythm, the familiarity, the way her voice dropped when she said his name, and the way he answered with a softness I hadn't heard him use with me in months. I told myself I was tired. I told myself my mind was playing tricks. I went into the nursery and laid Sutton in his crib, and I stared at his sleeping face, and I noticed, for the first time really, the shape of his mouth, the little dimple in his chin. I went downstairs an hour later. They were sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee. Bram looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read and asked if I'd made dinner yet. I made dinner. I want to tell you that I confronted him that night. I want to tell you I was brave. But I wasn't. I was scared. because if I was right, if what I was beginning to suspect was true, then everything I had built my life on was already gone, and I wasn't ready to live in that world yet. So I started watching. I watched the way he carried her bags up the stairs without being asked. I watched the way she touched his arm when she walked past him in the hallway. I watched her come downstairs in one of his old t-shirts on a Thursday morning, and the way neither of them flinched when I saw her. And I watched the baby. I watched my husband hold that baby with a tenderness he had never once shown when I brought up our own children. The children he had always said we should wait on. The children he had said we couldn't afford yet. 3 weeks in, Bram forgot his phone on the kitchen counter on his way to work. I am not a woman who snoops. I have never snooped. But that morning I sat at the kitchen table and looked at his phone for 45 minutes before I touched it, and when I finally picked it up I knew, before I'd even unlocked it, that I was about to find what I was looking for. His passcode was our anniversary. The messages started 2 years before our wedding. I sat in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock and read 4 years of an affair between my husband and his sister's daughter. There were thousands of messages. Photographs, videos. Things a woman should never have to see her husband do, with anyone, but especially not with the niece he'd helped raise after her father died. The niece who had called him Uncle Bram at our wedding. The niece who was now sleeping upstairs in my guest room, with the baby that, I now understood with a kind of horrible quiet clarity, was his. I made it to the bathroom before I threw up. I sat on the cold tile floor for a long time. I thought I was going to cry. I didn't. There was something underneath the shock that surprised me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even rage, not yet. It was clarity. The kind of clarity you only get once or twice in a life, where every confusing thing snaps into place at the same time and you understand, suddenly, what you have to do. I went back to the kitchen. I plugged his phone into my laptop, and I copied every message, every photo, every video onto a thumb drive. I made 3 copies. I emailed 2 to myself on accounts he didn't know I had. I put the phone back exactly where he'd left it. Then I called my best friend, who happened to be a divorce lawyer, and I told her everything. Her name was Constance, and she'd been my college roommate, and she'd never liked Bram. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Iona, listen to me. Do not say one word to him. Do not change one thing about how you act. Come to my office tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do. Here's what people don't understand about quiet women. We are not weak. We have just been waiting to be sure. For the next 6 weeks, I became the best wife in America. I cooked Bram's favorite dinners. I rocked Sutton to sleep without complaint. I asked Renly if she needed me to pick up anything from the store. I smiled at both of them across the breakfast table, and I did not let one single crack show, because Constance had told me that the law in North Carolina rewards the patient, and I was going to be patient. I opened a checking account in my own name at a credit union 3 towns over. I rerouted half my freelance income into it, money Bram had never tracked because he made more than me and didn't bother. I called the company that managed our mortgage and confirmed the house was titled in both our names, which meant I had legal standing. I gathered every tax return, every bank statement, every retirement account number. I made a folder. The folder lived at Constance's office. I bought 4 small wireless cameras at an electronics store with cash. I told Renly I was thinking of getting a security system because there had been some break-ins in the neighborhood. She didn't even look up from her phone. I installed them myself, on a Saturday, while Bram was at a faculty thing and she was at a doctor's appointment. 1 in the living room, 1 in the hallway upstairs, 1 in the kitchen, 1 in the guest room, hidden in a fake smoke detector I'd ordered online. I am not proud of that last one. But I needed proof that no court could question. I had it within 4 days. I also did something else. I tracked down the man Renly had told everyone was Sutton's biological father. His name was Harlan. He worked at a body shop in Charlotte. I drove there on a Wednesday afternoon while Bram was teaching and Renly thought I was at the dentist, and I found him under a Chevy with grease on his face and a tired look in his eyes. I told him who I was. I told him I needed to ask him a question. He told me he hadn't seen Renly in over a year. He told me they had broken up 6 months before she got pregnant. He told me she had refused to do a paternity test when he'd asked, and that she had told him to stop calling. He showed me texts. I asked him if he would be willing to take a DNA test. He said yes. He said it in a way that made me think he had been waiting for someone to ask him. I paid for the test. The lab compared his DNA to a hair sample I'd taken from Sutton's hairbrush, with Constance's guidance on how to make it admissible. The results came back in 11 days. He was not the father. I had a friend in Constance's office run a separate test against a hair sample I'd pulled from Bram's pillow. He was. I sat in Constance's office with that piece of paper in my hand, and I'd finally cried. Not for him, not for Renly. For myself? For the woman I had been 4 months earlier humming in my kitchen, with no idea that her whole life was a stage set someone else had built. Constance let me cry. Then she said, "Okay, now we plan the rest." The rest was this. Bram's family was big. He had 2 sisters, an uncle, a grandmother who was still alive at 91 and sharper than most 30-year-olds, and a wide net of cousins. They were close. They had a tradition of a big Sunday dinner once a month at his mother's house, and the next one was in 3 weeks. I called his mother and offered to host it at our house instead. I told her I wanted to do something nice, since Renly and the baby had been with us for so long, and the family hadn't really gotten to celebrate Sutton properly. She was thrilled. She cried a little on the phone. She said I was the best thing that had ever happened to her son. I also called Marisol, Renly's mother. I told her I'd love it if she could come early to help me set up. She said yes. I called Harlan. I asked him if he would be willing to come to a family dinner and tell his side of the story. He said he had been waiting 4 months for somebody to give him a chance to tell it. I emailed the messages, the photos, the DNA results, and a short cover letter explaining what they were to 17 members of Bram's extended family, scheduled to send at exactly 6:15 p.m. On the night of the dinner, I packed nothing. I bought nothing. I didn't move a single piece of furniture out of the house, because the house, according to Constance, was half mine, and if I was going to leave it, I was going to leave it the right way, with the protection of the law and not just out of spite. The furniture would come later. The morning of the dinner, I was up at 5. I made a brisket the way Bram's grandmother had taught me my first Christmas with the family. I made her green bean casserole. I set the dining room table for 15 with my mother-in-law's good china. The china she had given me at our wedding rehearsal and told me to treasure forever. I bought 2 bouquets of white roses for the table. Bram came downstairs at 9 and asked what smelled so good. I smiled at him and said I wanted today to be perfect. He kissed me. He told me he loved me. I let him. Renly came down at 11 in a blue sundress I had never seen before, with Sutton on her hip. She was glowing. She told me the dress was new. She said she'd bought it for the dinner. I told her she looked beautiful. The family started arriving at 4. His mother, his sisters, Marisol with her husband, who looked thinner than he had at Christmas, the grandmother in a wheelchair, pushed by her oldest grandson, cousins, aunts, uncles. They filled my living room with their voices and their laughter and the smell of the perfume his mother always wore. I watched my husband move among them with Sutton in his arms. I watched him introduce the baby to people as his great-nephew. I watched Renly stand close to him and beam. At 5:55, I stood up and tapped my wine glass with a spoon. "I want to say something before we eat," I said. The room went quiet. People smiled at me, expecting a toast. Bram smiled too. He had no idea. Neither did she. "I want to thank all of you for coming," I said. "I know it's been a long 6 months for everyone, especially for Renly and for Sutton. I want to make sure you all really get to know him tonight because I think you deserve to know exactly who he is." I reached into my cardigan pocket and I pulled out an envelope. 2 months ago, I said, I found out my husband and his niece have been having an affair for over 6 years. Sutton is not Renly's ex-boyfriend's child. He is my husband's son. I have DNA tests. I have text messages. I have photographs. And I have video. All of you should be receiving an email from me right now. I would suggest you check your phones. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. His mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered on my hardwood floor in a spray of red. Marisol made a sound I will hear for the rest of my life. A sound somewhere between a sob and a scream, and she stood up so fast her chair fell over backwards. Renly went white. Bram went red. The grandmother, the old woman in the wheelchair, looked at her grandson and said very quietly in a voice like ice, "Bramwell, what have you done?" Phone started buzzing. I watched Marisol's husband pull his phone from his pocket. I watched the cousin closest to me open the email and start scrolling, and I watched her eyes get wider and wider and wider. I had not played the videos at the dinner. I am not a cruel woman. I did not need to humiliate them more than the truth already had. Bram stood up. He said my name like a question. Don't, I said. Renly started crying. She tried to say something to defend herself, but the words came out broken and her mother was already across the room, and what Marisol said to her daughter then was not for me to repeat. Then Harlan walked in. I had timed it for 6:15 exactly. He came through the front door in a clean button-down shirt, and he stood in the entryway of my dining room, and he said, in a voice that was quiet but carried, I just want everybody here to know that for 5 months, this woman told me I was the father of her baby. Then she told me I wasn't. I came here because Iona asked me to, and because I deserve to be here, and because that little boy deserves to know the truth about who he came from someday. Marisol turned to him. She walked across the room and she took his hand and she said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. Bram tried to leave the dining room. His grandmother in her wheelchair said, Bramwell, you sit down right now. He sat down. I didn't yell at him. I didn't yell at him. I didn't yell at her. I had nothing left to say to either of them. I picked up my purse from the chair behind me and I walked to the front door, and as I went, his mother caught my arm. She was crying. She said, Iona, honey, stay. We will throw them out. You stay. I told her I loved her. I told her I always had. I told her the house was half mine, and I would be back for it on Monday morning with my lawyer and a moving crew, and that until then she could do whatever she wanted with the people sitting at my table. Then I walked out the front door of the little blue house in Asheville for what I knew was the last time as that woman, the woman who had stood at the stove 4 months earlier humming in the dark. Constance was parked at the curb. She had been there since 5. She handed me a cup of coffee and a tissue, and she drove me to the apartment I had quietly leased the week before, 3 miles away, in my own name, paid for with my own money. The divorce took 11 months. I got the house. I sold it. He didn't fight me on much because the family had turned on him in a way I had not predicted, and his lawyer told him every fight he picked would just produce more documents that more people would see. His mother stopped speaking to him entirely. His grandmother changed her will. Marisol filed for legal guardianship of Sutton because Renly, after the dinner, fell apart in a way that frightened everyone, and Marisol decided that her grandson would not be raised by either of the people who had made him. I think about Sutton sometimes. I hope he is okay. He was an innocent baby. He didn't ask for any of this. I moved to a town outside Asheville about a year after the dinner. I bought a small house with a porch all by myself with the money from the sale and a loan I qualified for with my own credit. I planted tomatoes in the back. I have 1 cat now, an old gray one I got from the shelter. I work too much and I sleep well at night, which is something I had not done in years. Last spring, I met a man named Cassian at the farmer's market. He restores old furniture for a living and he laughs at his own jokes, and the first time he came to my house for dinner, he washed the dishes without being asked. I am taking it slow. I am not in any hurry. I have learned the difference between being chosen and being settled for, and I will not make that mistake again. People ask me sometimes how I knew, how I figured it out, how I stayed quiet for 6 weeks while I gathered everything I needed. I tell them this. A woman who has been ignored for years gets very good at watching. A woman who has been told she is overreacting gets very good at being sure. And a woman who has been treated like the help in her own home gets very good at understanding the value of a plan. The brisket was perfect, by the way. I asked his mother later, in one of the long phone calls we still have, the ones where she calls me her real daughter, and I let her, because in some ways she is. I asked her if she had eaten any of it. She told me she had taken a piece home in foil that night and eaten it cold at her kitchen table at 2 in the morning, after she had finally stopped crying. She said it was the best brisket she had ever had in her life. When I look back at the woman I was that Tuesday evening, humming over a cast-iron skillet with rain on the windows, I do not feel sorry for her. I feel grateful to her, because she was the one who turned off the burner instead of throwing it. She was the one who chose to watch instead of scream. Every quiet thing she did over those next 6 weeks is the reason I am sitting on a porch in my own house today, with my own cat, and a man who washes my dishes without being asked. The thing nobody tells you about betrayal is that it does not come out of nowhere. Bram did not become the kind of man who could father a child with his own niece in one afternoon. He became that man over years of small choices, and I missed every one of them because I had been raised to keep the peace and call it love. Renly did not walk into my home with a baby and a secret in one day. She walked in carrying years of choices that her family had let her get away with, because nobody had been willing to say the hard thing out loud. Cause and effect. Every miserable thing that happened at that Sunday dinner had been planted long before I ever met either of them. I just happened to be the one standing in the field when the harvest came in. What I learned, sitting on that bathroom floor the morning I read those messages, is that being a good woman is not the same as being a quiet one. Kindness without a spine is just an invitation. I had spent 4 years making myself smaller to keep my marriage smooth, and the smaller I got, the more room he had to do whatever he wanted. The day I stopped shrinking was the day everything changed. Not because I got loud, because I got clear. If you are watching this and something inside you is whispering that what you are seeing in your own life is not right, please listen to it. That whisper is not crazy. It is not paranoid. It is your own intelligence trying to save you, and it deserves your respect. Take your time. Open your own bank account. Make copies of the things that matter. Find one person who will tell you the truth, the way Constance told me, and let them help you build a plan. Strength is not the same as fury. The strongest thing I ever did was wait 6 weeks and smile across a breakfast table while I quietly chose myself. I am not the woman who stood at that stove anymore. She was good and she was loving and she deserved better, and the kindest thing I could do for her was to finally believe what her own eyes were trying to tell her. If a piece of my story finds the woman in your life who needs to hear it, even if that woman is you, then everything I went through was worth telling.